Hello, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Global Innovation Policy Center first program series focused on innovation ecosystems. We're so glad to have you. During today's session, we'll explore the importance of craftsmanship and expose the real stories and the people behind the brand. We'll also learn how the innovation ecosystems impacts key U.S. leaders, including the perspective from the director of the National IPR Center. Craftsmanship within companies enables investments in the skills development, in human capital, and technology base, translating to world-class quality products. Today's experts will describe the business path to quality, as well as the diverse set of stakeholders involved in the entire process. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for the session, Bob Pearson. We're so pleased to have him with us. Bob Pearson is a well-known author, frequent speaker, and blogger on digital marketing, as well as an adjunct professor at the University of Texas, where he is teaching a new course on digital media models and developing a second course on persuasive selling. Currently, Bob serves as CEO of the Bliss Group, an integrated communications agency. And prior to this role, he served in many C-suite roles, including Chief Technology Officer, President, and Vice Chairman. He's also a guest lecturer at the U.S. State Department's Marketing College with a focus on digital media. He's also written 2 books, which I encourage you to check out, Pre-Commerce and Storytizing, based on key learnings over his career. So I'll turn things over to you, Bob, and thanks again for leading this session.
Casey, thank you. And I'm so glad we're doing this panel. I'm going to just start with some very brief remarks of my own to set up the panel, introduce the panel, and then get right into the questions. So I think the way, Casey mentioned this in terms of craftsmanship, when we often talk about how do we create the right environment for innovation to flourish, that's something that we all think about. I grew up in the pharmaceutical industry, think about that all the time. When we think of intellectual property, people often think of it as a legal protection, which it absolutely is. But the word intellectual is key here. And really what we're doing is we're trying to unlock upstream the entrepreneurs, the innovators, the people who may not even know are innovators today, that will come up with something tomorrow that we really need and will benefit from. So how do we protect them? And IP provides that blanket of protection to allow people to just go about their work. So today we'll hear from an entrepreneur who can see our needs and create products we may never realize we needed, but once we see them, we say, okay, gotta have that. We have a leader who is rethinking how we build the most innovative and diverse teams and how that will impact innovation. And we have a leader who focuses on ensuring our US environment can allow hope to spring eternal via new ideas translating into useful products. So before we begin with our panel, I want to also make an observation on innovation itself from studying human behavior for many years. We all know a couple of facts, are pretty obvious. Innovation is about trial and error. It's advances in science and tech are usually occurring via iteration. It's very rare that we just have something that just happens. So we need to celebrate success and failure equally as we learn. And what we know about humans is equally interesting. We usually innovate in very small teams, not committees. We usually have passions that we follow. We're not just following directives. It's that ability to innovate and not worry about it because we know that our country has our back through the ideas that we all talk about in respect. So let's go now on to today's panel. Today we'll be joined in conversation by Director Steve Francis of the National IPR Center, Stacy Gifford, a PhD, RSM, and Master Inventor at IBM, fantastic title by the way, and Drew Gudelian, founder and owner, Engine Cycles. Director Steve Francis is the Assistant Director for Global Trade Investigations Division with Homeland Security Investigations and Director of the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center. In this position, he is responsible for the oversight of HSI's national programs related to trade enforcement, intellectual property, and counter-proliferation. Dr. Stacy Gifford is an IBM Research Manager and Master Inventor, co-leading materials discovery for the future of climate. Her research focuses on leveraging AI to accelerate the discovery of new materials for carbon capture and storage, and building partnerships to scale this technology. Stacy joined IBM Research in 2014, applying nanofluidics to molecular detection. She earned her PhD in 2013 from Yale University in molecular biochemistry and biophysics, and her BS in 2007 from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in biochemistry and biophysics. Drew Goodelian is an entrepreneur, the builder and owner of Engine Cycles and Wissahickon Cyclery, located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Drew is well known for his masterfully crafted steel and titanium bike frames, which I'm interested in personally. Drew earned the award of Best Off-Road Bike Honors at the North America Handmade Bicycle Show and has a passion for frame building. It's a great panel that we have ahead of us, and we'll get right to this right now. So, Director Francis, let me start with you and ask the mission of the National IPR Center, the role of intellectual property in your work. Give us an idea of what that means.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. It's really great to be here. Casey, thank you. Thank the Chamber for the invitation to be here. So what does it mean? Wow. I arrived here 2 years ago and I was asking myself that same question. What is the National IPR Center and what are we doing to protect intellectual property? And really, it's, as you can imagine, the entire ecosystem that we're dealing with here. So yeah, I've been very fortunate. The National IPR Center has been in existence for over a decade. It was codified by law in 2016 as the U.S. government's response to intellectual property protection and the enforcement of its international trade laws. I mean, I inherited an extremely, professional, robust task force that has Homeland Security investigations at the directorship. We have the FBI as the deputy director here, as well as Customs and Border Protection. So you look at these three agencies that are really impactful in protecting IP. HSI is an investigative border agency, so we have the authority to detain, inspect, seize, and conduct investigations of any border crimes. So as you can imagine, and I think everyone knows, about 85–90% of our illicit activity on seizures come from Hong Kong and China for the last 5 years. So clearly a lot of border issues in protecting IP enforcement. But I think what's probably the most impactful part of the National IPR Center is the private-public sector partnership. I mean, we cannot do our job without the private sector providing us with data, information, really the new technologies and trends that are operating in and around this entire IP ecosystem. We've prioritized three areas, which is national security as it relates to the counterfeit microelectronics that go into DoD supply chains, economic security as it relates to hundreds of billions of dollars that are lost to the U.S. economy each and every year. And lastly, most importantly, protecting the health and safety of the public. And clearly during COVID and the pandemic, I can go on and on about the 1,000 criminal investigations we've launched, the millions, hundreds of millions of really seized and disruptive efforts we've had across the globe with our international partners, and really just protecting the public from these counterfeit and prohibited items that are entering the U.S. supply chain.
Got it. Steve, thank you. And I'm going to come back to you in a question after we go around the panel related to the public-private partnership and COVID, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. Stacy, you're a part of the Future of Climate group in IBM Research. It's an interesting topic in itself. Tell us about the types of projects you work on and how your research is critical to IBM.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm part of IBM Research, which is we have roughly 2,000 to 3,000 researchers in our research division. And we like to think of ourselves as the organic growth engine for IBM. So we kick off a lot of technology development and research that goes on to live in different IBM business units and different products, but we also do a lot of fundamental research too. And so the area of work that I'm focusing on, which is, as you said, Future of Climate, we kicked off this research program about a year ago, and it's part of a broader, research department called Impact Science, which is focused, we derive the name from impact investing, and it's really focused on sort of that 3 to 5 year time horizon to solve some of the biggest problems that we face as a society. So we look at things like health, we look at future of work, and then we look at climate. And we do this in a way that really centers on our strengths as a company. So if we look at, what IBM's core businesses are today, and our core innovations is things like quantum computing, it's things like AI, and it's things like cloud. And so the research programs that we have kicked off under Future of Climate are all centered around those strengths. So We're looking at building a sustainable hybrid cloud. We're looking at using AI to identify climate risks and then also optimize the best ways to mitigate them. And then the area that I'm particularly focused on is materials discovery. And we're using AI to basically ingest thousands of pieces of data. It can be journal articles. So we use natural language processing to ingest just huge amounts of data that would normally take researchers years to sift through to understand really the intricacies of a scientific field. What are the top innovations in that field? What are the gaps, and what are things that maybe people haven't considered in terms of new materials that are already being used elsewhere that we could repurpose and have all of the properties we're looking for in a particular carbon capture scenario. We can then model and predict new materials. We can simulate their performance, and then we can rank them in terms of their ability to perform in certain scenarios. So whether that's post-combustion capture at a coal-fired power plant, or it's direct air capture with really dilute CO2 concentrations. And at the end of the day, the goal is for us to create like a platform that enables others to design materials that suit their needs. So we know that we're going to have to capture carbon dioxide from the air and from point sources like power plants in order to meet our emissions targets for 2050. And carbon capture is recognized by the UN and others as something that we have to do in order to meet those targets. And so we're just trying to enable those companies that produce these carbon capture materials to do a better job and do it in a way that's much faster than the typical 10-year time cycle it takes to design new materials. We don't have 10 years to address climate change. So we're really trying to accelerate that process.
Okay, great. I can think of many follow-up questions here, Stacey. So Drew, I'm going to just go out on a limb and guess that you do not have thousands of researchers helping you as a very passionate cyclist and someone who started a small business from scratch. That's probably correct.
Yeah, I was just thinking I'm pretty much a fish out of water here with this group. I mean, you know, my entire adult life has been spent in this business. I was 23 years old when I started this business. I started it because I only knew two things. I knew how to cook and I loved to ride my bicycle, and I didn't want to cook anymore. So after going to culinary school, I opened a business because at the beginning it was just naive, and I just said, oh, well, I like bikes, so I'm going to open a bike shop.
Well, what made you, because I know you self-deprecating when you said that, but you represent America in so many ways in how we get started. And so why at the age of 23 did you say, I got to go do this? What was going through your mind? And then also, what's that innovative process that you have learned how to follow as time goes on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main, I've always had a pretty serious drive to work, never had a hesitation to work, never had a hesitation to just commit full in on something. So I probably missed out on some stuff. I worked 90, 100 hours a week the week after I graduated from college and have been doing it almost ever since. I probably just in the last 5 years toned it down a little bit, but I have an obsessive personality, and the bicycle was what I decided I guess I wanted to be obsessive about. And the interesting thing is that, you know, you go back 23 years ago and I was very interested in living within 5 miles of where I work. I was very interested in running a business that allowed me to ride my bicycle as much as possible. I drive a car maybe 5,000 miles a year. I kind of like have been doing all of this carbon footprint stuff since the beginning, but not necessarily because of any other reason than it was just like what made sense to me. You know, right. It made sense to me to not drive an hour to get to work. It made sense to me to ride my bike instead of drive my car. And I just have lived a relatively low carbon footprint lifestyle for the past 26 years, I'm sorry. But as time went on and the business went on, I kind of became more interested in the manufacturing end of things, less interested in the retail aspect of it. And I realized that there were niches and things that were missing within this industry. And, you know, I think both of the other panel people are dealing with things that are millions, if not billions of people are affected by. Yeah. And I'm dealing with maybe 5% of the population rides a bicycle, and 5% of that 5% are true enthusiasts. and are willing to buy the bicycles that I make.
Right.
So I'm on a really, 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 really small group of people, as opposed to a rather global collection of people.
It's cool, Drew. As I listen to you, it's like all three of you are entrepreneurs in your own right, and you're iterating through your own mindset of how do I keep getting better and better. And Stacy's thinking of new models and how do we simulate things and move with urgency. And Steve's, of course, putting together partnerships that people hadn't probably even thought of in the past. So, Drew, I'll get back to you, and let me go to Steve now. And Steve, we're all hyper aware of COVID-19. You know better than we do how much fraud there is out there, and how many people are trying to take advantage of the situation. And yet you're building these great public-private partnerships. I think there's something called Operation Stolen Promise 2.0. Could you reflect on that, your efforts to protect us, and the other thing is, what could the private sector do even better to be supportive to you and the team?
Sure, Bob. Sorry, I don't know if I'm losing you here. All right, I'm back, I think.
We got you.
Drew, I think you got a really cool, business there, and I'm, envious that you started your own business and you're successful. So, and I want you to be one of our partners in the near future. So I'm looking forward to connecting with you after this. So, yeah, Bob, I mean, it's just since April of 2020, we launched Operation Stolen Promise. It was really a global strategy within Homeland Security Investigations to bring together the IPR Center, our cyber division, our international operations, as well as our financial division, and to combat the fraud relating to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has just been, every day dealing with a different issue and the newest, trend of different crimes that are operating around the globe, and working with our international partners. So we worked on that. Really, it just the first, we first saw is just a huge influx of counterfeit PPE, antiviral products, pharmaceuticals coming in April of 2020, and then fast forward, with the FDA approved vaccinations and treatments, and now we're seeing Operation Stolen Promise 2.0, which is focused on that, and we're seeing now spoofed websites that are stealing personal identifying information. The newest trend is these surveys that are coming out via text, asking for a response of how their experience was with Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, et cetera, and people providing information. I mean, they're essentially identical websites, so you wouldn't even know the difference. Actually, the first time we looked at it, we thought the fake website was actually the real one because they had better pictures. But all that being said, I mean, the financial crimes that are being operating in and around the COVID-19 pandemic, it's just been overwhelming. Every week we have these discussions about the newest trends, and the most important thing I think we're doing now is public service announcements and working with our state, local, federal, and even international partners with Interpol, providing these alerts about all these different schemes. And really, I mean, if it's happening in Europe, it's eventually happening here, or vice versa. And we're sharing a lot of this information. The private sector has just been incredibly supportive. I never thought we'd be sitting across next to 3M to talk about, in the last 3 months, we seized over 20 million counterfeit 3M N95 respirators, and 3M being alongside us to say, yes, these are our products. These are not our products. And these are folks that exploited the, secure supply chain. And now we're identifying, I think we've launched 75 criminal investigations, and these were purchased and intended sitting in a warehouse for the first responders and intended to go into hospitals. So it's just been this, ongoing, crimes that are evolving, and I'm amazed that we're still talking about it today, and it's really at the forefront of what we're doing at the National IPR Center. But as we're doing that, we're still, working on all of our other initiatives with counterfeit automotive parts, bicycle helmets, luxury goods. So just continues to grow each and every day. And I hope there's not going to be an Operation Stolen Promise 3.0. So I'm hoping that we fix this and prevent this criminal activity that's happening. So we're doing the best I can, and I can't stress enough the work with the private sector and really the intelligence and the AI and machine learning technology that's supporting prioritizing our enforcement efforts, especially on the e-commerce marketplaces and other platforms that are sharing this data and information with us.
That's great. And Steve, analyze and teach on identifying the techniques of bad actors worldwide. And I guess what I would say is we've never needed the private sector partnership more to protect our intellectual property, and this is not going to stop. So COVID-19 is really just giving us that opportunity to build those relationships that hopefully continue. So what you're doing now, I think, is setting the stage for hopefully a much more robust set of partnerships. So thank you. Stacy, I was very interested in one of the things you're involved in, which is the National Council for Expanding American Innovation. And you're getting into diversity and innovation and its importance to unlocking innovation. And can you just drill down a little bit on what are you learning and what do we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, sure. So the National Council for Expanding Innovation is a steering committee that was assembled by the U.S. Patent and Trade Office, and it came out of the Success Act, which was a few years ago. And part of that was to create the steering committee that looked into how we improve inventor diversity across the United States. So our CIO, Catherine Guarini, actually is the steering committee member representative from IBM, but I support her as one of the working group members. So I've had the opportunity to sit in a lot of these meetings and contribute content and kind of give IBM's perspective on the matter. So it's been really, really interesting to be a part of that. And I think there's a recognition from the U.S. Patent and USPTO that diversity is really important in, to innovation, right? So if we just tap the same set of inventors, you sort of limit the scope of innovation that you can achieve, as a country. There's a lot of untapped talent out there, both, starting at the grade school level all the way up through, independent innovators like Drew, and sort of how do we enable that range of innovators to patent effectively and then also monetize their patents, right? Because there's a lot of economic growth that comes from being able to protect your IP and invent freely without worrying that you're going to be infringed upon. And so I think there's a recognition from USPTO that more needs to be done both at the grade school level, looking at sort of corporations and large organizations and how they roll out diversity initiatives within their organizations. So like within IBM, we have a really robust patenting program that supports our researchers and developers and engineers in their ability to patent. Certainly other universities and other organizations have these too. So what are the best practices in that sense? How do you ensure that you're getting the most, robust, diverse pipeline in those programs? And then monetization of that. So certainly companies are good at that. That's sort of what we're all about. But for individual inventors too, what are the best practices? How can the USPTO reach out? What sort of resources can they make available to independent innovators so that they can do this more effectively? So it's not such a cost burden, because that's a huge part of it. It's expensive to patent. You need lawyers. It's complicated. So if you don't have that infrastructure as part of a large organization, what is out there that's available to you? And so trying to create those resources and then also advertise them effectively so people know that they're out there. And then finally, metrics. So we don't have good metrics for how we actually measure diversity and innovation as a company and then also as a country. So even the Success Act really struggled to get a handle on what are the diversity levels in our inventor population in the United States. We don't track that information when people submit patents. So they had to do a lot of kind of creative analysis where they were doing like name recognition to understand gender and race, which is obviously flawed, but that was really all they had available to them at the time. So we know that it's a problem, but we've only scratched the surface because we don't even really have the data to look at how extensive a problem it is. And then if we're trying to get better, we need to be able to actually measure that. So those are sort of the 4 areas that they're looking into. And all of the different participants on the steering committee are providing feedback and input on sort of what they do and what they see as problems and how we can get better at it.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to just add one thing. I applaud you all looking at that is I always look at it as ideas don't know boundaries. They don't understand walls. They don't understand. Ideas just want to happen, right? And so the more people we get with different thinking, different backgrounds, more likely we are to be successful.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
anyone who, right?
Yeah, I think we were talking before the panel started about how different, IBM and companies you've been at have perspectives on, diversity is not just a nice thing to have, it's a necessary thing to have to be successful in your business, right? You need to be able to reach diverse populations in the marketplace. And in order to do that effectively, you need to have diversity within your own organization so that you're able to reach those markets, so that you can innovate in a way that's meaningful to those markets, and so that you can recruit diverse candidates. It's not going to happen in a vacuum.
Right.
So
Drew, you wrap us up. It's like one of your favorite products that you've developed. How did you develop it? Why did you come up with the certain idea?
Well, the funny thing is, just to kind of go back to what Stacy was saying, and the interesting thing is how it all kind of oddly ties together. I don't own a single patent because I can't afford it. And half of the reason I wouldn't even attempt it is because all the websites that I would go to that would seem reasonable in price, that would maybe allow me to get a patent, I would be skeptical of, because I would be like, that's bogus. I'm not going to put a drop of information into that website because, it can't be real, because it's $100 instead of $5,000. And like, I wouldn't even trust something that came across as very approachable for me to patent one of my ideas, because I would just assume that it's a scam. And
by the way, if you file today, you can get a free COVID-19 vaccine. Right?
I mean, I really roll the dice on a lot of my products because I know that they're relatively easy to replicate. And I don't have any patents. The majority of the stuff.
The race for you is like, you just got to innovate more than the marketplace that you're in.
Yeah, you try and keep up. And again, like, all of the stuff is more created out of recognizing a flaw in what might be considered the norm. I feel like complacency is the death of just about any business, and it is rampant in this industry. People try to just keep going with what they have. If it's successful, they have no desire to innovate, no desire to make the product better if it's still selling. And I'm maybe unfortunately in a position where I'm willing to say, no, we're just gonna keep working on this and make it better, and we're gonna eat it that we have a couple hundred, a couple thousand of something that it's antiquated, we're done with it. And it's a small company, we're 3 people, one person that's real good with a computer, one person that's real good at fixing stuff, and one person that's good at making stuff. And the combination of the 3 works, but we would have 100 more things if we had clones of ourselves. We don't have the time, we don't have the resources, we don't have the money. There's so many ideas in my head that aren't going to happen, but I've come to terms with that.
Yeah, no, you're doing a lot of great stuff, Drew. And I think that, and just in wrapping this up, because it's hard to believe we're already at the half-hour mark, is, here we are with Drew, who represents so many small businesses worldwide, who are have an idea, pursue it. Next thing you know, there's a business. That's what drives our economies. And then eventually we get to the point where we have companies like IBM who have the capabilities to, quite frankly, look so much deeper at where society's going and how we can be helpful in many ways, and quite frankly, serve as a symbol for many other companies and industries of how to do things well. And then we have Steve, who's out here looking at how to build new partnerships to protect our world. And so, you can see in this panel the diversity of, we have to get IP right. We have to build the right protective mechanisms so we can actually let innovation flourish and have entrepreneurs not focus on how to protect themselves, but how to innovate and make a difference in the world. So I want to thank everyone for your contributions. It was great. I wish we had another half hour, but that's the way it is with webinars on Zoom and all that. And Casey, I'll turn it back to you. Is anything in closing?
Just want to thank everyone for your participation today. Just fascinating hearing from each one of you. And this Craftsmanship series is really a cornerstone of innovation for the Global Innovation Policy Center as we move through the Ecosystems Conference Series in April. I want to wish everyone a happy World IP Day, which is April 26th, and continue on with us in this conference series. Thanks again for joining us, and thanks, Bob, for moderating this session. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.